The marketplace baked beneath the merciless sun, dust rising in little whirlwinds that caught in throats and stung the eyes. Wagons creaked, horses stamped, and voices barked out in coarse laughter as men bargained, traded, and drank their fill. In the center of it all, with the shade of a leaning awning stretched across the dirt, a commotion broke the rhythm. A settler, red-eyed and swaying from whiskey, had cornered an old native elder. His voice cracked through the chatter, cruel and loud, accusing the elder of theft, of touching something that was not his. The elder's hands, worn and trembling, lifted in quiet denial, but the crowd pressed in, murmurs turning to jeers. The settler raised a hand, ready to strike, and then, cutting through the haze of dust and laughter, a boy's voice, thin, sharp, and trembling but unbroken, shouted, "Leave him be." The crowd turned. There he was, barefoot, ragged, clothes torn and stained from weeks of dirt roads. His hair was a tangle, his face hollowed by hunger, but his eyes burned with a reckless fire. He had nothing, no family to stand behind him, no blade, no rifle, no reason to intervene except something buried deep within him that refused to stand by. The boy stepped forward, placing his frail, sunburnt body between the drunken settler and the elder. It was foolish. It was defiance. It was the kind of madness only born in those who have already lost everything. The frontier had no patience for fools. The war had left scars that cut deep into both soil and soul. Settlers, weary from bloodshed and loss, carried their bitterness like weapons. Native tribes, once proud and untouchable, were driven from rivers and forests that had been theirs for generations. Tensions simmered everywhere, on the trails, in the camps, at the edge of every firelight. In this broken land, a boy without family or name was less than dust beneath a boot. He had drifted from one settlement to another, surviving on scraps of bread, a coin tossed in pity, or a crust of jerky stolen when no one was looking. His father had marched to war and never returned. His mother's face blurred with the memory of illness, her hand clutching his until she could no longer. Since then, he had wandered, cast out by those who wanted no burden, treated as a stray mutt. At night, he curled into the hollow of broken barns or beneath the open stars, ribs pressed to bone, breath shallow from hunger. Loneliness was his constant shadow. Fear, too, but never strong enough to kill the spark inside him that still whispered of something better, something worth defending. That spark flared now. He stood against the settler's glare, trembling but unyielding. The crowd shifted uneasily, as if wondering whether to laugh or scorn. The elder's eyes, dark and sunken with years, fixed on the boy with quiet astonishment. For one heartbeat, silence stretched across the marketplace. Then came the shove. The settler's hand crashed against the boy's chest, knocking him backward into the dust. Laughter burst from the onlookers. The boy coughed, spitting dirt, but rose again. His bare feet dug into the ground. He stepped back into place. Again the settler swung, this time with a closed fist. The boy staggered, lip splitting, blood dripping down his chin. Still he refused to move. Boots surrounded him. Men spat insults, jeered, told him to crawl back into the dirt where he belonged. Rough hands grabbed his shoulders, shoved him down. A kick slammed into his ribs. He gasped, curling, then uncurled, forcing himself upright once more. His face was bloodied, his body frail against the blows raining down, but his eyes locked onto the elder. The message was clear, even without words. Asterisk, you are not alone. Not today, asterisk. Fists pummeled him. The crowd became a blur of snarling faces. Dust clung to his sweat and blood. Every strike sent shock through his bones, but he clung to stubborn defiance, arms spread to shield the elder. It was madness, but it was also bravery. Through the haze of pain, he caught the elder's gaze. Eyes filled not with fear, but with sorrow. Ancient sorrow, deep as the land itself. The boy crumpled at last, knees hitting the earth. The settler spat, wiping his hand on his trousers as though the boy were filth unworthy of touching. The laughter ebbed, the crowd dispersing, bored now that the entertainment had ended. Only the elder remained, standing silently as the boy wheezed, bloodied and broken at his feet. Slowly, he bent, his shadow falling over the boy. His voice was soft, raspy with age, yet it carried weight. "You carry fire, little one. Fire they cannot break." His hand, trembling but steady, touched the boy's shoulder. Then, almost in a whisper, words spoken more like a prayer than thanks, "The warriors still watch. They do not forget." The boy, vision blurring, tried to lift his head, but the world spun. He caught only fragments: the elder's lined face, the dust swirling like smoke, the murmurs of passers-by fading into distance. His body gave way, and he slumped into the dirt. The elder's hand lingered a moment longer, as though sealing something unspoken between them. Then the world went black, and the boy fell into silence, unaware that his reckless defiance had set something far greater in motion. The boy awoke to the taste of blood on his tongue and the sting of cracked ribs whenever he drew breath. The marketplace was gone. He lay in the brittle grass beyond the town's edge, dumped like refuse, where no one would trip over him. His cheek pressed to the cold ground, dust caked in the corners of his mouth. The sun had already dropped behind the ridges, painting the sky with bruised purples and burning red. For a long while he didn't move. His body ached in 100 places, every shallow breath setting fire to his lungs. The laughter of the crowd still echoed in his skull. He thought of crawling back, begging for a crust of bread, perhaps sleeping in a barn if some kind soul showed pity. But he knew better. To them, he wasn't a boy. He was a stray dog, one they had already kicked too many times. So he pushed himself up on shaking arms, spat blood into the grass, and staggered forward into the wilderness. The land swallowed him quickly. Dusty trails gave way to brush, then to stands of pine. The air cooled as the light faded. Somewhere behind him, the sounds of the settlement, boots, laughter, the faint ringing of an anvil, dwindled into silence. Before him stretched the vast loneliness of the frontier. Endless trees, crooked hills, the whisper of wind carrying no promise of shelter. Each step was agony. His ribs screamed. His lips split anew when he licked it. His stomach gnawed at itself, hollow from days without food. He pressed on anyway, one barefoot step at a time, until darkness fell heavy and the stars unveiled themselves overhead. He collapsed beneath an oak, shivering, wrapping his arms around his knees. The wilderness did not forgive. Wolves howled in the distance, their voices rising and falling like ghostly chants. Something scuttled through the brush nearby. A rabbit, maybe, or something larger. His eyes darted, fear twisting in his gut. He had no knife, no rifle, not even a stick. If the wolves came, he was nothing but meat. Cold seeped into his bones. He curled tighter, teeth chattering, mind drifting between pain and exhaustion. His thoughts wandered unbidden to his mother's voice, soft and warm, singing him to sleep in another life. He could almost hear it now, carried on the wind. He let his eyelids slip shut, half believing she sat beside him, hand stroking his hair. Then came the smell of smoke. He jerked awake. A thin line of firelight flickered in the darkness a dozen paces away. His heart slammed in his chest. Someone was there. A shadow moved behind the glow, tall, broad-shouldered, silent. The boy pressed his back against the tree, holding his breath. Had the settlers followed him? Bandits? Or worse, the tribes whose lands he had stumbled into? The figure bent, placed something near the edge of the fire, then disappeared into the black. Minutes passed. The boy dared not move. Finally, hunger overruled fear. Crawling forward, he reached the fire's edge. There, on a flat stone, lay a strip of dried meat and a crude wooden cup filled with water. His hands trembled as he snatched them up. He tore at the meat like an animal, swallowing hard, barely chewing. The water was warm and tasted of earth, but it filled the hollow ache in his stomach. He devoured it all, then glanced around, expecting the shadow to step forward. But the night was still. The stranger had vanished. Sleep claimed him before dawn. The next day, the boy stumbled onward, ribs aching less with the food in his belly. He kept glancing over his shoulder, though he saw no one. Yet the sense of being watched clung to him like a second skin. In the mud by a river crossing, he found fresh tracks beside his own, larger, heavier, moving parallel. His pulse quickened. That night, when he built a feeble fire from twigs, He found another gift waiting just outside the glow. A flint knife, its handle wrapped in leather. He stared at it for a long time, fear and gratitude tangling in his chest. Someone was following him, yes, but not to harm. Still, he could not rest. He dreamt of fire and screams, of men on horseback with rifles blazing, of his mother's hand slipping from his own. He woke drenched in sweat, clutching the knife, heart hammering. Out in the trees, he thought he saw a figure watching, the silhouette of a man standing tall against the moonlight. He blinked, and the figure was gone. By the third day, his fear began to shift. The shadow was no longer menace, but presence. He grew used to finding signs. A broken branch pointing the way to water, a trail cleared of thorns, a fish left beside the embers of his dying fire. No words were spoken, no face revealed, yet a strange trust began to take root. On the fourth night, the boy dared to lift the knife in silent salute toward the darkness beyond his fire. For the first time in years, he felt something more than hunger or pain. He felt seen. The boy awoke to the cawing of crows. Their black wings wheeled above the tree-line, circling something unseen. He tightened his grip on the flint knife, its rough leather handle biting into his palm. For days now, the wilderness had whispered of company. Tracks appeared where his own passed, food and water left by unseen hands. He no longer questioned it. Whoever watched him was no enemy. At least, not yet. But others were near. He felt it in the stillness. By midday, he found their sign. A horse's hoof prints sunk deep in the mud by the riverbank, not smoothed by rain or time. Beside it, cigar ash scattered in the reeds. He crouched low, fingers brushing the print, his heart thudding faster. Bandits. He had heard men speak of them in hushed tones around campfires. Drifters hardened by war, men with no flag or kin, living only by the rifle and the knife. They hunted the weak, fed off fear, and left bones where villages once stood. He should have turned back, but there was nothing to return to. So he pressed on, senses straining with every step, the trees closing in like walls. The first arrow came hissing out of nowhere. It thudded into the tree trunk a hand's breadth from his head. Splinters sprayed across his cheek. He froze, blood draining from his face, then bolted. His ribs screamed with each stride, lungs tearing, feet slapping against stone and dirt. Voices erupted behind him, laughter, curses. Men calling out like hunters driving game. Run, pup! Run! Branches whipped at his skin. The forest blurred. He stumbled over roots, caught himself, ran harder. Another arrow streaked past, slicing his sleeve. Panic surged, raw and bitter. The boy darted downslope toward the river, thinking water might hide his trail. But the bandits were close, their boots pounding, their laughter closing in. He hit the riverbank, splashed into the freezing current, and forced himself across. The water bit like knives, dragging at his legs. He gasped, teeth clattering, arms thrashing. On the far side he scrambled onto the rocks, dripping and trembling, only to hear their jeers carrying from the trees. Little rat thinks he can swim. He turned, knife in hand though it shook in his grip. His chest heaved. 3 men emerged from the shadows, beards wild, coats torn and patched, rifles slung over shoulders. Their faces were carved with cruelty, eyes glittering with hunger. One of them grinned wide, missing half his teeth. "Easy pickings," he said. The boy took a step back. Another. His heel struck a rock. No escape. His heart pounded so loud he could barely hear their boots crunching closer. Then the forest answered. A shape dropped from the trees with the weight of a thunderclap. The bandit nearest cried out, an arrow punching clean through his shoulder, driving him to the dirt. Before the others could lift their rifles, the shadow moved again. The boy saw only flashes, a blur of muscle and sinew, the glint of a blade in moonlight. A knife swept across a throat. Blood sprayed black against the bark. Another bandit swung his rifle, fired wild, but the figure rolled, silent as mist, and drove steel into his ribs. It was over in seconds. The boy stood frozen, breath tearing from his lungs, as the last bandit collapsed in the dirt, choking on his own cries. The shadow straightened. At last, he saw his protector. The man was tall, shoulders broad beneath fringed leather, His face was painted in streaks of earth and ash, hair bound with a strip of hide that carried feathers stained by age and weather. His eyes, dark and unflinching, locked on the boy's. In one hand he held a bough of polished wood, in the other a knife, still dripping red. His chest rose and fell slow and steady, as though the killing had been no more difficult than breathing. For a moment, silence stretched. The boy's fingers tightened on the knife, gifted to him days before. He wanted to speak, to think, to question, but the words caught in his throat. The warrior moved first. He bent, cleaned his blade on the dead man's coat, and slung it back across his hip. Then, without a word, he knelt beside the wounded bandit still groaning in the dirt. His hand pressed against the man's chest, not to save, but to end. The knife slid once more. The forest swallowed the final cry. When he rose again, the boy had not moved. Their eyes met. The boy's chest hammered, fear and awe tangling until he could hardly breathe. He wanted to run, yet his feet held fast. The warrior stepped closer, each stride measured, purposeful. He stopped only a few feet away. Then he did something unexpected. He reached into the pouch at his belt, withdrew a strip of dried venison, and held it out. The boy blinked, confused, trembling still. His hand lifted slow, cautious, and took it. Their fingers brushed, rough skin against calloused leather. For the first time, the warrior spoke. His voice was deep, deliberate, heavy with an accent the boy had only heard in whispers. "You run fast," he said. The boy swallowed, clutching the meat in one hand, the knife in the other. He found no words to answer. The warrior gave a single nod, then turned away, melting back into the trees, as if he were part of them. The boy stared after him, chest rising and falling, until the forest swallowed him whole. Only then did he dare breathe again. That night, the boy did not sleep. He sat by his fire, the venison untouched beside him, and stared into the dark, waiting for the figure to return. He did not know whether to be afraid or grateful, perhaps both. But one truth settled heavy in his chest. He was no longer alone. The storm broke first in the sky. Heavy clouds gathered above the ridges, swallowing the stars, muting the moon's glow. The boy sat huddled in the mouth of a shallow cave, knees drawn to his chest, watching lightning flicker far off through the trees. Rain fell soon after, slow at first, then in torrents that lashed the land and hissed against the fire he had tried, and failed, to keep alive. He thought he was alone until a shadow filled the entrance. The warrior stepped into the cave without a word, water running in streams down his leather fringes, feathers plastered against his hair. He carried no firewood, no bundle, only himself. He lowered onto the stone floor with the quiet grace of someone who belonged to the earth more than to men. The boy tensed, knife in hand, but the warrior's eyes slid to him, steady and calm. No threat, no demand, only presence. The storm raged outside. Inside, the silence grew thick. At length, the boy spoke, his voice hoarse. "Why are you following me?" The warrior's gaze lingered on the rain. For a long moment, it seemed he would not answer. Then, in his deep, careful tone, he said, "You stood." The boy frowned. "Stood against them," the warrior replied. His eyes shifted, pinning the boy with their weight. "For the elder." The boy looked down at his hands, blood still crusted on his knuckles, the ache in his ribs a constant reminder. He felt foolish suddenly. "I just couldn't watch." The warrior gave no reply, but something softened in his expression. They sat in silence again, the storm's fury filling the space between them. When the thunder finally rolled into distance, the warrior rose, pulled flint and steel from his pouch, and coaxed a small fire to life. Sparks caught. Flames licked the dry moss he carried, and warmth spread into the cave. The boy stared at the flames, mesmerized. He realized, with a strange shiver, that it was the first time in years someone else had built a fire for him. Days passed like this, wordless companionship bound by necessity. They traveled together, though the warrior always walked a step ahead, leading without command. He hunted and set snares, leaving portions for the boy. At night, their fires crackled low, and sometimes, if the boy dared glance, he saw the warrior's eyes reflecting in the glow, unreadable, watchful. The boy's fear gave way to questions, and the questions to stories. One evening, staring into the coals, he whispered about his mother, her songs, her soft hand on his hair, the way her breath rattled before it stopped. He spoke of hunger, of nights spent curled in empty barns, of men's boots driving him back into the road when he begged for shelter. His voice shook, but he spoke on, because no one had listened in so long he had almost forgotten what it was to be heard. The warrior said nothing for a time. Then he spoke in low tones, words weighted by memory. He told of a river, once his people's lifeline, where his brother had been gunned down while fishing, of a winter when soldiers came, driving families from their lodges with fire and steel. He did not weep. He did not soften his voice. But the boy heard the grief thrumming beneath it, the same grief that gnawed at his own heart. Two broken lives, mirrored in the firelight. Trust grew, not in leaps but in fragments. A gesture, a shared meal. The moment the warrior handed him a bow, guiding his hands with patient silence until the boy loosed his first arrow into a log. The small nod of approval that followed was worth more than bread, more than shelter. It was belonging, however fragile. But shadows gathered beyond their fragile bond. Rumors carried on the wind, settlers speaking of the boy's defiance in the town square, of the elder he had shielded. Some spoke of revenge, others of trouble stirring among the tribes. Everywhere they went, eyes lingered too long, hands rested too easily on rifles. The boy felt it pressing in, the weight of a world waiting to break. One night, camped in a hollow of stone, he could not sleep. He turned to the warrior, who sat cross-legged, carving lines into a piece of wood. "Why do you help me?" the boy asked. The warrior's knife stilled. For a long while he did not look up. Then he said, "You have fire." The boy blinked. "Fire. You do not turn away." The word struck him with strange force. All his life, people had turned away from him. Doors closed, backs turned, boots kicking him aside. Yet here was a man who had seen the very thing he thought foolish, reckless, and named it strength. His throat tightened. Before he could answer, a distant sound cut through the night. Drums. Low, steady, rolling like thunder through the trees. The boy sat upright, heart racing. "What is that?" The warrior's gaze lifted to the dark horizon. His face was unreadable, but something hardened in his eyes. "Tomorrow," he said, voice heavy as stone. "They will come." The boy swallowed. "Who?" The warrior set the carved wood aside, embers painting his face in orange light. He met the boy's gaze, with solemn weight. "The ones who still watch." The boy felt the air shift, the fire crackle sharper, the forest hold its breath. Somewhere in the distance, the drums grew louder. He lay awake until dawn, listening, waiting, wondering what storm he had truly called down when he stepped into that marketplace and said three foolish, reckless words. Leave him be. Dawn came not with birdsong, but with the thunder of hooves. The boy woke to it, an echo rolling across the valley floor, shaking the stones beneath him. He scrambled upright, heart pounding, and rushed to the mouth of the hollow. The warrior was already standing there, silhouetted against the rising sun, his bow in hand. His eyes never left the horizon. And then the boy saw them. Riders, dozens upon dozens of them, cresting the ridgeline like a tide of shadows. Their war cries split the air, fierce and raw, echoing off the cliffs until the valley itself seemed to howl. Feathers streamed from their hair, weapons glinted in the morning light. 100 warriors, sweeping down the slope in perfect rhythm, their horses' hooves striking the earth like drums of war. The boy's breath caught. He had never seen such power, such fury bound in human form. His chest swelled with awe, with fear, with something that felt like belonging. But the riders were not alone. From the other side of the valley came the settlers. Dozens of them, armed with rifles and shotguns, faces twisted with hate and fear. Among them, the boy recognized the drunken settler who had struck him in the town square, rifle gripped tight in his hands. Behind him lurked bandits, eager for spoils, their laughter carrying thin and sharp. The two forces would meet here, and he, a ragged, barefoot boy with nothing to his name, was caught in the middle. The warrior stepped forward, planting himself like a pillar between the boy and the gathering storm. He glanced back once, his eyes steady, voice low. "Stand if you have fire." The boy's hand shook. His ribs still ached. His knife felt like a child's toy compared to the rifles aimed across the field. Yet something in the warrior's voice, something unspoken, ignited the spark inside him. He nodded. The valley erupted. Rifles cracked, smoke belching into the morning light. Arrows hissed, finding flesh. Horses screamed as they barreled into the fray. Warriors leaping from saddles, with knives flashing. The settlers staggered under the first wave, but rallied quickly, their gunfire tearing through the charge. The boy pressed himself against the rocks, eyes wide, heart thundering. Then a settler broke through, rushing toward him with a hatchet raised high. The boy froze. At the last instant, instinct roared through him. He lifted his knife. The hatchet swung down. He ducked, the blade grazing his hair. He drove the knife upward, blind with terror. It struck flesh. The settler cried out, stumbled, and fell. The boy stared at his bloodied hand, trembling. He had never killed before. The warrior's voice cut through the chaos. "Good." The boy gasped, forcing himself to stand. Around him, battle raged, arrows piercing, rifles cracking, bodies colliding in the dirt. The air filled with the stench of smoke and blood. He stumbled forward, gripping his knife, following the warrior's lead. Together they wove through the chaos, the warrior striking swift and sure, the boy darting in his shadow, surviving by instinct and sheer will. The settlers fought hard, but they were outnumbered, outmatched. The warriors pressed them back, step by step, until their line faltered. Horses crashed into wagons, scattering goods and powder. Flames leapt where lanterns spilled. Screams rose and fell. And then, through the smoke, the boy saw him, the elder. He stood at the far edge of the valley, robes tattered, leaning on a carved staff. His face was lined with years, but his eyes glowed steady, fixed on the boy. For a heartbeat, everything else fell away. The gunfire, the screams, the clash of steel. It was only them. The boy's chest tightened. He remembered the words whispered in the dust. The warriors still watch. The elder lifted his hand in silent acknowledgement. The boy's throat burned. By the time the last shots faded, silence fell heavy across the valley. Settlers fled. The bandits who survived scattered into the hills. Smoke drifted in slow ribbons. The ground was littered with bodies, both settler and warrior. Horses whickered nervously, their flanks streaked with blood. The boy stood in the middle of it all, chest heaving, knife still slick in his hand. His legs shook, but he remained upright. The warriors gathered, silent as they dismounted. One by one, their eyes turned to him. Not with contempt, not with laughter, but with recognition. The elder stepped forward, leaning on his staff. His voice carried, soft but unyielding. "This one has fire." The 100 warriors bowed their heads slightly, a ripple of respect moving through them, like wind through grass. The boy's eyes stung. No one had ever looked at him like that. Not in the towns, not in the barns, not in the streets where he had begged. The warrior at his side glanced down, expression unreadable. "They offer you a place," he said. The boy's chest clenched. A place. Among them. A family forged in blood and fire. It was everything he had dreamed of, everything he had longed for on nights when the stars had been his only witness. And yet he hesitated. He thought of his mother's voice, of the life stolen from him, of the hunger that had carved him into what he was. He thought of the freedom of the road, of belonging nowhere but to himself. His throat tightened as he shook his head slowly. "I can't," he whispered. The elder studied him, then nodded, as if he had expected this answer. "Then walk your path, boy of fire. But know this, you are not forgotten." The boy lowered his head, tears hot against his cheeks. When he looked up, the warriors were mounting their horses once more, the elder among them. With a cry, they swept into the horizon, a storm of hooves and feathers and steel, leaving him standing alone in the smoke. The warrior lingered a moment longer. His eyes met the boy's, steady and unreadable. Then he too turned, joining the tide until he was swallowed by dust. The boy stood in the silence that followed, knife still in hand, heart heavy and burning. For the first time, he felt not like a stray, but like someone the world had seen, someone who mattered. He wiped the blood from his hand, tucked the knife into his belt, and turned toward the endless wilderness. His path was uncertain. His body still ached. His heart still carried loneliness. But he walked forward anyway, fire in his chest, the echo of hooves still thundering in his ears. Sometimes one act of defiance is enough to change a life. Sometimes it stirs the hearts of nations.